All right, everybody, close your mouths and open your ears because I'm Rob.
I'm John.
And I'm Cody.
Screw it. And this is the So Yeah podcast.
Alright guys, we're going to talk about special effects that people show in videos. Now the example we show here is pretty realistic. Because, this is supposed to be an earthquake. Oh no, dust! Ah! That scared me! That scared me! I'm so happy it's over.
All right, guys, welcome down to the So Yeah podcast with me, your host, all caps Rob, also known as Hey You, Get Out of My House. And of course, my co-hosts John and Cody, also known as Tweedledee and Tweedledum, which is what you ask, the world may never know. The podcast where we discuss all things media and the hot topics surrounding them, from music and movies to everything in between. Basically, if it's made to entertain, we're going to ramble about it. John, Cody, and myself are a trio of screen junkies, also known as underachievers. We look at a lot of screens, watch a lot of content, and therefore have a lot of feelings, and decided to discuss those feelings on a podcast to satiate our perpetual need for self-glorification. And here we are, guys, with episode 5. Are y'all excited?
Yes.
All right. Where the subject of the evening is going to be special effects and their place and use in modern cinema. Now, obviously, guys, we are for the use of special effects, but not the overuse of them. And we are here to discuss really that one main topic and compare 3 films, one that was almost completely made with practical effects and one that we felt had a good balance of one and the other, and one that we felt was oversaturated. We'll be discussing this topic and then finishing things off with a final question of the episode. The first question, our big hot topic, is: are special effects being overused? And John, we're going to start with your opinion. Go.
Yeah, for the most part, I feel like it is, but that's kind of just part of the cinema we deal with now, because you can kind of, and some of them are using them good, but some of them are not. Some of them are just doing it to be lazy, because you could do a budget film now and just add in a bunch of special effects to make it look a little bit decent. Like some of the modern Trimmer movies I've seen from 2018 and 2020, they look a little high quality, but they're not.
And Cody, your opinion, sir.
I feel like, in a lot of ways, when we talk about special effects, computer generated effects specifically, I feel like is what we're on to here, which is, I feel like they're overused, especially with any kind of larger budget film. I feel like if there's any spectacle or sequence that needs to happen, instead of figuring out how to do it practically on the screen, they'd much rather pay someone to sit behind a computer and do it, which isn't always bad. CGI has its place, but I feel like it's kind of become a bit of a crutch now for these big movie studios, and even the smaller ones, like John has brought out. Like some of them, they just think that special computer effects replace good writing and good cinematography.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's the fix all for everything. Yeah.
George Lucas actually said it his best. He said, special effects are just a tool, a means of telling a story. People have a tendency to confuse them as an end to the means. A special effect without a story is pretty boring.
He did watch episode 2, right?
Hey, he said it probably before he wrote those.
I assume
Might have.
so.
And
And all
also,
the,
like, he was like really pushing the envelope of what was possible for digital effects at the time. To be fair, like no one had really put CG to that level of test before.
Yeah.
So
and his
I think
first,
did he go crazy with it? Absolutely. But I feel like he was really trying to see how far he could push it.
but his first movies were really good with practical effects
It's
prior
true.
to prior to the re-releases.
Yep. All right. So my answer to this question is, once again, are special effects being overused? And, my answer is without a doubt. And I think my biggest gripe with special effects is, no matter how good the CGI has gotten over the years, you can still spot CGI, and like you'll always see in the back of your head that, it's like if you've seen any behind the scenes footage of any film and that footage shows you how green screen works, you will then always have that green screen somewhere in the recesses of your mind every time you watch any green screen shot. And I feel that really hurts the immersiveness of the film, the immersion of the film. Practical effects give it just more soul. And we as an audience can always see through that, cold, soulless CGI. And it's kind of like in the old days whenever they would like have all the painted backdrops in the old films and like just a little bit of the actual effects. No matter how well it was painted, we still knew that it was a backdrop effect. And I feel that, really we've come full circle and just kind of wrap our excuse around, well, it's modern technology. So it's okay. Like instead of a backdrop, we have a green screen with effects added later. So I feel like all in all, yes, they're overused and for all the wrong reasons.
There's a danger with CGI too. CGI tends not to age well, depending on how you use it.
Yeah.
If you go back and look at, when we were kids, we called them the special edition of Star Wars Episode 4, 5, and 6. And those added in special scenes kind of look crusty. I mean, like the one with Jabba talking to Han that was added back in to the remaster of Episode 4. Jabba looks pretty trashy with his CGI model there. I know that they were reusing an old scene from the original Episode 4 that was originally cut, but Jabba's model is pretty trash. So I think that's the problem you run when you go back and look at old movies that were really they call really infused with CGI from the early 2000s. You think they were great when you watched them. Now you go back and watch them and they're pretty crusty looking. Do you remember the movie by Jet Li? I think it was called The One.
Yes, I remember The One. Yeah.
Yeah. I used to think that was a great movie and that it had really great special effects. It is, it looks like it belongs on the Sci-Fi Channel now. It does not look good.
Yeah. I was kind of saving it when we got into like the films and everything, my feelings on it, but I'll go ahead and say it now. Yeah, like that. I agree with you, John. Like CGI has a bad habit of aging poorly, even when you think it's amazing at the time, because to be fair, at the time it is amazing. That's as hard as the computer can push those effects. But the thing is, we're always coming out with better computers, better processors that can get more and more finer detail right on like a three-dimensional model. Which means basically that, if you lean too heavily on CGI, eventually what once looked great is going to look really bad or amateurish later on down the line. Like even like not for movies, like the PlayStation. When we all first got our hands on a PlayStation and powered it up, or an N64, we're like, oh, these graphics are amazing. Look at this. Oh my, it's a 3D world. And you compare that now to like games nowadays on like the PlayStation 4 or 5 or the Xbox or even like the Nintendo, the latest Nintendo, the Nintendo Switch, like between in a short span of time, like 20, 30 years, like the gap there is immense. Like those graphics they didn't age well. So, it's the same for movies. I think very few films that first use CGI have aged very well. And the ones that have aged well are the ones that used it sparsely and used it intelligently. They used like lighting to their advantage and camera framing and blocking. And so the CG still holds up because, you're not all up in the digital effect. It's kind of played off the environment. And that's usually when it worked best, especially back then. And that probably still, in fact, I know it still holds true now.
Yeah. I think what helps a lot too is when you use CGI in the past, if they tried to use more artistic interpolation when they did it, it helped preserve the quality of the graphics for years to come. Because back then they were wanting to try to get as realistic as they could, and I think that ends up hurting them because realistic in 2000 is not the same as realistic in 2023. So you're going to have issues. Like, do you remember Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within?
I was thinking about that literally while you were talking about what you were saying.
Yeah.
Literally in my mind, I was comparing that. I was comparing that Final Fantasy movie, and I was comparing Toy Story, and they came out in and around the same time, close enough.
Yeah. They're just. Go ahead. What are you saying, Rob?
I was going to say to touch on this whole thing, like in general. It's like Cody was saying, like the films that age better are the ones who, in the old days, used CGI and special effects sparsely, but still relied more on practical effects. And I feel like that's a keynote, because if you rely too heavily on CGI, knowing full well that the CGI will get progressively better with the passage of time, you take away that film's potential to be timeless. Because yes, all effects age, but practical effects age more gracefully. CGI does not. Like, and Cody, what you said, I was going to say the same thing about how we thought that Battle for Bikini Bottom on Nintendo in 2003 had amazing graphics. I still play that game for fun, and I realize just how antiquated the whole thing looks now. And it just goes, that's fine for a video game. You expect that. But for a film, you want that feeling of timelessness, and you don't get it when the film relies solely on computer graphics.
Yeah, it's rare. I'd say like I said, I'd say a couple films get away with it. I think Toy Story is one of them that can still get away with it. The effects are starting to show a little bit of their age now. But again, because like the primary characters were toys and not people, and they already have that fakey, plasticky look to them being toys, lended itself a lot to the film's sustainability. They weren't trying to hew too realistic.
And plus, it's a cartoon. Like, you expect a cartoon to show age. You don't want a real life film to show age. Like you can forgive something fully animated. You can't forgive something as easily that's based on reality.
Yeah,
I think a good example I go back to for artistic interpolation. You go back to video games again. You think of the GameCube era Zelda games. People were upset that Zelda Wind Waker was not going to be realistic looking, that it was going to be shell shaded, cartoony graphics. But if you go back and play it now, you don't feel like you're playing a game from 20 years ago, because it feels those graphics don't feel dated. They feel like there's still quality to it, because there was you're not really expecting a realistic look from it. And while Twilight Princess is a pretty good Zelda game too, I feel like it's kind of got a little bit older, because it was trying to go for a little bit more realistic look, and it hurt it, even though it's the newer of the two GameCube Zelda games.
Yeah.
While we're on this conversation, guys, do you want to add something in real fast? We're talking about how the visual effects can age poorly. Why not touch on some of the practical effects that we felt age gracefully?
Sure. Yeah, I can do that. So practical effects that have aged gracefully. I would say the practical effects, it's an easy one to go through, but it's a standout because it works so well, which is Jurassic Park. Anytime a practical dinosaur showed up in the screen, like, it looked like there was an actual animal there, and that still looks like I watch that film semi-regularly, and every time, like, the CGI looks good. Like, Jurassic Park CGI aged really well, but it's finally gotten to the point where you can kind of start to see it more now, because we've come so far. But anytime a practical dinosaur is on screen, that feeling is completely gone. There's a dinosaur on screen, and you're seeing it interact with people. Like, it's completely seamless. And of course, all the Indiana Jones films from the 80s, all those, the practical effects in them, for the most part, hold up pretty well. There's some green screen that that doesn't look too good, but anytime, like, something blows up on set, or Indy's being dragged under a car, it's seamless because it's really happening.
Yeah.
The first T-Rex attack in Jurassic Park was practical, wasn't it?
It was a mix. Anytime it zoomed out and showed the T-Rex like full scale, like from tip to tail, that was CGI. What helped with that is they had that scene take place at night and in the rain, so all that kind of obscured your ability to directly see the effect.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to tell when it switches, which was masterfully done. Anytime the T-Rex interacts with like a car, or the actors, that is a practical animal. It's really there, which again was really, really well done.
Yeah, I think Industrial Light and Magic did an excellent job at practical effects because they were involved in Indiana Jones too, weren't they, Cody?
Yeah, they were involved in pretty much all the ones that you tend to think of when practical effects hold up well. Jurassic Park, Indiana Jones, the original Star Wars movies. Like a lot of the films, you're just like, man, those practical effects look really good. Chances are Industrial Light and Magic had their mitts on it somewhere.
That's actually something that I was going to bring out too about the original Star Wars films. Was I look at the puppet Yoda for part 5 and 6, and frankly, I think he's superior to the puppet Yoda in part 1. Like that was just such a well done puppet done by Frank Oz, the master of the puppetry. And, you know, you have those expressions, you have those tired eyes, you have the happy eyes, you have the angry eyes. There was not one time where his expressions weren't believable. And even now, going on 40 years later, I still forget when watching that scene that Mark Hamill's talking to a puppet. I feel like Luke is talking to Yoda. Whereas even in part 1, the expressionless and very different looking puppet Yoda couldn't make an expression to save his or Frank Oz's life. I see practical effects that aged better and actually got worse with the progression of time, whereas CGI has gotten better. That's funny to me, but you know, whatever.
Well, I feel like practical, like puppets and stuff like that, I feel like that's becoming a lost art. It's kind of like, sadly, like the hand-drawn cell animation of old, that's becoming a lost art as well. Like, you know, it's something that, because of the advent of newer technology and CGI and things like that, no one is passing on the craft of doing that to the next generation because the next generation doesn't seem interested in it because usually it involves a bit more work, a bit more effort, and more elbow grease involved. And so people are like, no, why would I do that when I can put a few keystrokes on the computer or have a 3D printer print the puppet for me? You know, why would I make this from scratch? So I feel like that's something that's slowly being lost, which is sad.
You know, I was going to say that I liked a lot of the practical effects in Back to the Future. I thought they did a well job, and it holds up extremely well to this day. I don't think they use much green screen. I could be wrong. I think they did use some in Back to the Future too. I think Robert, didn't they?
They did
they
use
had
green
to with the
screen.
cars.
Well, I mean, you know, they used green screen or at least some form of it in all 3 films. But again, they did rely still heavily on practical effects because it was the 80s.
But yeah, it balanced out really well in that movie. And, you know, going back to that CGI thing, the CGI balance, it has to be good because, you know, you have to, if you misbalance it, it's going to end up looking horrible later. And like y'all were talking about how people are getting lazier with animation. People are getting lazier because they're CGIing stuff. And I think it really kills the quality of the show. I know there's a lot of, I'm not really big into anime, but I do try to watch some. And a lot of anime is trying to blend CGI or just go straight CGI to cut down on probably production time, I presume. And it ends up getting a lot of backlash. Yeah. There's a lot of backlash on anime that used to be, I guess, hand drawn or still drawn, however you call that, Cody. You'll probably correct me on that, but they go straight to CGI, and the fans just go insane, and they're upset about it.
And yet they act like nothing is wrong, which is funny to me.
Yeah.
Anime is a tricky one. There's some anime that blend it well. Like they do save cost, and so I understand why there's the temptation to use it. Like there's some shows that blend it well. Like they'll use it. They don't really use it for people. They tend to use it for like backgrounds or vehicles and stuff. And like I said, some of them blend it well. And of course, I mean, I feel like it should be said that, we're kind of bashing CGI tonight, but that's not to say that like the CGI artists that do this stuff don't work hard. They do. I know that there's a lot of work that goes into like designing and bringing these things to life. More often than not, where it falls short is production time. Like the producers and studios, not only do they want to use CGI for everything, but they also don't want to give these artists enough time to polish it and make it look better. And so that makes a lot of these guys have to settle as opposed to meticulously go through and make it and polish it up, which is also an issue.
I know that Akira Toriyama has been doing a lot of his, because he has a very specific anime style, if you're familiar with it, like Dragon Ball Z and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
He's actually done an exceptional job at using his style in 3D animation. I know they used it in a couple of video games using Akira Toriyama.
Oh, the fighting games. Yeah, those look great.
Yeah, very balanced. That fight, I can't remember the name of the fighting game. I know the Dragon Quest game used it, and it was exceptionally well. It felt like I was watching Akira Toriyama anime, to be honest with you, the whole time I was playing it.
Yeah.
Here's a bit of a thinker question. We know that obviously, we're living in the post-COVID world where Hollywood and everything else took a big hit to their wallets. And I'm sure that as a result, any post-COVID film or series has suffered as a result. My question to y'all is, do you think as Hollywood recovers financially more and more from COVID, that we might be able, or that we might start seeing them kind of polishing this poorly done CGI and possibly going back to more to practical effects again?
I feel like the answer to that is probably going to be no. I try to be an optimist, but I can't feel a little pessimistic, only because Hollywood now has to not only compete with independent and foreign films, it also has to compete with streaming, which can produce more content quickly. And it can release whole films or TV shows, and people don't have to go to the theater to watch them. They can sit at home and they can click a button and they can watch whatever they want. So I feel like Hollywood, rather than focusing on quality, I feel like they're really trying to focus on quantity of getting films out there that people want to go to the theater to watch. And so I feel like they're going to be more inclined to just go back to their assembly line ways and just crank out film after film after film.
And John?
I feel like they've tried a little bit. Like I know Star Wars, going back to the shows that occur after Return of the Jedi, they've been trying to inculcate practical effects to kind of balance it out and make it almost look like you're looking at a show that may have been from the old episode 6 or 5 or 4, whatever you want to call it, of Star Wars. Like they used more practical effects, I think, in The Mandalorian, didn't they, this time, Cody? I mean, there's obviously a lot of CGI, but they've used a couple things that were more practical.
They have. To be fair, they have used more practical effects, especially in shows like The Mandalorian. I will say I couldn't bring myself to watch the Book of Boba Fett. But in The Mandalorian, I know they've used they try to lean harder on more practical effects, especially in the first season.
Yeah, there was a lot of use of practical effects for the aliens and stuff, and they continued that on to the Book of Boba Fett, even though the Book of Boba Fett wasn't that great. But the Mandalorian used quite a bit of it. But I think that was just to appease the fans. It ends up falling down to what Cody said: what's going to be quicker, easier to produce films and get them out quickly. Yeah. I haven't really felt like I've seen a good blockbuster movie pop up. Well, I don't even know if I would call it post-COVID, but whatever you want to call this. But
yeah. I don't really post the
like
pandemic, everything shut down, no money coming in ways.
Yeah, post-pandemic, I don't really.
Post 2020.
Post 2020, I don't really feel like I've seen any major movies hit the theaters. So they're just trying to pump them out and see what sticks at this point.
Yeah. And my thoughts on it are actually, I concur 100%. I think Hollywood may occasionally use practical effects to appease the fans because, Hollywood, they hear the reviews and they know that a good 50 to 60% of viewers don't like what they're seeing. And so they will probably occasionally kiss some butt here and there, but I think that quantity over quality is Hollywood's new business model, and unfortunately, I think we will for the foreseeable future. It puts quite a downer on the episode, but unfortunately, I see again just an occasional kiss up with mostly soulless CGI being the new norm for as long as we all shall live.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Yeah,
Well,
it's,
yeah.
maybe we'll get a few gems. There's like a few films that have come out that I liked.
I thought that Chris Pratt movie, Tomorrow War, was pretty decent.
The effects, yeah, it was Tomorrow War. The effects in it were okay. It did get really CGI heavy near the third act, as most films are wont to do.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like it did pretty good. There was a film that came out, and everyone kind of didn't go see it and rolled their eyes at it because it starred Twilight girl Kristen Stewart. It was a thriller.
She gets such a bad rep, and she's not a bad actress.
She's not. The film was Underwater. Underwater. If you haven't seen it, if neither one of you have seen that, I would recommend it. It's a really good science fiction thriller that does a pretty good job of balancing CGI and practical effects. I feel, then the CGI, you can kind of see it at times, but that's just CGI nowadays. But it still does a pretty decent job.
Yeah,
and I thought it was good.
Well, now that we've kind of started getting into comparing films, let's go ahead and cover our three main films of this subject. We're going to go ahead and start with Tremors, the 1990s horror / sci-fi / monster film starring Kevin Bacon and Reba McEntire and others actors whose name I can't remember and didn't bother to look up.
Burt Glasser, or was it Burt Glasser, or what is the guy's name that ended up being the main character for all the other?
Well, that's his character's name is Burt Glasser.
Burt Gummer?
Oh, Burt Glasser. Oh,
Burt Gummer. Gummer.
Okay, Gunner. Yeah, there you go.
All right. Well, we're choosing this film, guys, as our example of a film that relied mostly on practical effects, and we're pretty much going to be discussing what we think worked and what we think didn't work with this film. And John, start us off, sir.
I don't think there was any CGI in that movie, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, it was very well done. I mean, for that era, the CGI worked. I at times I felt the orange guts that flew out were sweet potatoes or yams.
It was ketchup in some sense. I promise you, ketchup. It looked just like ketchup and syrup.
Well, it was very orange, so I just felt it was sweet potatoes, like mashed sweet potatoes or something.
Very possible.
John, I had sweet potatoes for dinner tonight, okay? It was ketchup.
Please, I need it to be ketchup.
I need it to be ketchup right now, John.
But I thought the practical effects were really good because everything worked well. And, it was definitely low budget. It felt low budget, right?
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was a B film. Like Kevin Bacon, like at the time, he looks back now and thinks very fondly of it. But at the time, during an interview he said that he was walking with his wife down some, random sidewalk and all of a sudden dropped to his knees and yelled out, "I can't believe I'm doing a movie about killer worms." He was so upset because he knew this was a cheap B film that had very little chance of success, much to his pleasant surprise. But yeah, like it was a low budget, cheap B film that even the actors weren't proud of at the moment.
Well, I feel like they really did their best in practical effects because it was just showing the ingenuity they used in everything. The worms were very realistic looking. Well, you're not realistic looking, but it was believable enough. It wasn't like a Muppet or anything coming at you. And I felt their constant use of the desert area that they were in. Like you kind of just feel like they just pulled out those that rusty bulldozer, probably from wherever they were actually filming, and used it.
Probably.
as a prop for something to get them across that area. And when the actual building was falling apart, were they actually on top of a building they were collapsing, or was that on like a sound stage?
Oh, I wish I
No,
knew.
I know. So they actually built that town out in the middle of the desert, and the buildings were specially designed to collapse in on themselves as part of the effect. So as far as I know, they were on the building when they were doing the effect of it collapsing. Maybe it was stunt doubles in place of the actors when all the collapsing was happening. But those buildings that was not on a set. That was the town itself, and it was designed like those buildings had special designs to collapse in on themselves to do that.
I felt like they didn't have stunt doubles because I felt like there was too short of a time period between seeing Kevin Bacon fall at one point on top of the roof when it was starting to fall apart to actually have been a stunt double. I mean, maybe it could have been me, but
You'd be surprised how quickly they're able to sneak them in there.
yeah.
I'm reading right now that the guys who wrote this, and I think even directed, I'm not sure, they also wrote Short Circuit, which is another great example of practical effects versus special effects, because that robot, despite being a simple piece of puppetry, was handled so well. And you see that same kind of magic in this other film that they're closely involved in. So they're two guys who knew how to make practical effects work.
Yeah. And it kind of goes to show that you can have like a B level plot or a film that isn't dealing in high concepts. But if you go at it with a good eye for practical effects and an earnest attempt to try to make the best film you can, it can kind of transcend the little box that people like to put it in, like B monster movie. Like Tremors does a very good job of that, and part of what sells it is the practical effects. Like they are very well used. Everything looks authentic. Like you feel like this is a small Midwestern desert town somewhere in the middle of Nowheresville. Like it does a really good job of communicating. Like John said with the bulldozer, like me and John know we've come from small towns. That rusty bulldozer, we probably see like one of those on the side of the road when we drive by, like especially back when we were kids.
Might be out at your mom's house and stuff.
It could be out at my mom's house. You never know. So, but so it really does a good job of selling the situation and selling the setting. And so I think that's part of the reason Tremors continues to be like a cult classic even today. It really does a good job of selling its premise.
And there are sections of the movie where they're just, sitting on those rocks trying to avoid being attacked by the are they called tremors or worms? What were they called?
I think they finally settled on graboids.
Yes, they settled on graboids mostly because the guy that suggested it ended up dying in the film, and so they kind of felt obligated going forward to name that, like the characters in universe. They kind of felt guilt. They kind of got guilt tripped into naming them that because the man that came up with the name ended up getting eaten. And how he got eaten was a really avoidable mistake. It actually does a good job of setting up in the film. It was something that it was like a freezer or something that Val and Earl fixed, and they put off fixing it. And then later on in the film, because they put off fixing it, it goes off, and the thing comes up through the floor and kills that guy who asked them to fix it in the first place. So
was it Chang or something like that?
Yeah, it was old Chang.
Yeah, old Chang. Yeah.
Poor dude. All he wanted was a few lousy bucks.
15 lousy bucks.
Yep. All right. Well, I guess it's my turn. Yeah, I was reading here about some of the ways they handle the props, how the full scale graboid. It's funny. While they are mostly called graboids, I actually end up calling the monsters Tremors because the film is called Tremors. So I end up calling them Tremors. So I'm going to call them Tremor, and everybody can bite me. The full scale Tremor was actually first dug into a trench and then dug back up again for the scene. Like that's how masterfully, like they didn't just dig a trench and then push some sand in it. They actually dug it up to give it that it was just dug from its subterranean habitat look, which is one example of how masterfully they handled their practical effects in this B film. Now, obviously, obviously some of the effects did age. Like I think of that scene where Val ran from the last one, and you can clearly see the loose ground bounce as he runs away in it. Like it was almost laughable because in the exact same spot as where the tremor pushed up and then ran after him. But it's like for the time, they were still very believable. And despite the effects aging, it still has that X factor that makes a practical effect more involving than a visual effect. And I even remember I was watching a couple of clips of the film on YouTube, and almost every top comment was basically saying CGI will never compare to animatronics. It will never compare to actual physical effects. So it shows that, we aren't just three bitter millennials here who can't let go of the past. There is a magic to something tangible, something real, something relatable versus what we all know and can spot just like that as being nothing but a piece of animation.
Yeah, and to kind of back up, just so we're not being just continually singing this film's praises. I'll agree with you. The third act kind of does push their special effects to the limit. If you pay attention, like the cliff, like the area off the cliff, once you realize that that's a painting, you kind of can't unsee it. And then
was it a painting? I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's a painting. They do a good job. Like it took me a long time to notice that the environment off the cliff is a painting.
Well, now I got to watch
now that
the
I've
scene
ruined
while
it
you're
for
talking.
you, when you go back to watch it, you're gonna be like, "Dang gummit, I didn't notice before, Cody." And then when the thing like busts out of the cliff, and then careens down, it looks good, but it's still a little wonky. But that was kind of the hardest effect to sell, really, because that's like a full body shot of an animal exploding out of a cliff.
Wow. I'm watching the scene as you talk now and really analyzing it. You're right. There's nothing beneath him. There's simply something behind him.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. They did a good job. Like I said, they did a good job. The only way you give it negative points is once you notice it, you can't unnotice it.
No, you sure as heck can't.
But they did a good job of covering it up. Like really, legitimately, it was only the last time that I watched that film, which was like maybe a couple of years ago, did I finally notice, oh, that's a painting. Every other time I've watched that film, and I watched it a lot as I was growing up, I never saw it.
That is so crazy.
I never noticed it, but like I said, I don't have any childhood, nostalgia for it because the first time I saw it was a couple days ago.
After we told you about it.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, you said it fooled you, right, John?
Yeah, it did.
We can turn that around to a plus because, if you have to watch it several times to catch it being a painting, that's a sign of it actually being pretty good. It's not immediately something you notice. So that is a plus in this film.
Yeah. So in short, what worked and what didn't for this film?
I mean, nothing didn't work in the movie. I mean, the movie worked well. That's why it's a cult classic.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't really say anything bad about it. I mean, other than maybe the sequels to it are a little sketchy sometimes.
Yeah. Like any overused franchise.
What do you think, Cody?
Cody is contemplating right now. We can see his face and y'all can't.
I'm running the film through my head right now at like 4 times speed. I will say like the one other place that I would be a little more critical of it is when the graboid bursts through the basement of Bert. And there's a scene where they're shooting at it and it like puts Bert and the monster in the same screen. And you can kind of tell that that's green screen, that they're kind of splicing 2 images together.
Yeah.
That would be one place where it didn't really work. And that a green screen's a hard sell, and the creature, and like they didn't want to have like the creature actually throwing concrete and rebar and stuff at the actors while it was thrashing all over the place. So I understand why they had to do it, but it kind of, green screen's gonna green screen. But other than that, this film does a really good job of making all its effects work. And it is a nice, tightly written little film with very few relative plot holes. Again, I feel like between that and the effects, that it really does a good job, which is, again, like John said, why it's a cult classic, why so many people keep getting drawn back to it, whether they realize it or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
I will say the only plot hole I see is that there is a Reba McEntire song in the soundtrack.
Well, you got to sell your biggest star. Like nobody else in that film had the draw that she had at the time, so you got to sell her some to people. The only thing in the film that I feel didn't work was just the simple fact that, as with all effects, they did age, and like anything, they have begun to show their age. So put it in front of a modern viewer, and they may call it cheesy because they just don't appreciate what it is to compare one time to another. Like in that time, it was cutting edge, and this time it isn't. So it might be lost on the younger generation. The next film that we're going to discuss, guys, is going to be a modern film, Star Wars Rogue One. Once again, to prove that we're not just bitter millennials who live in the 2000s and 90s. This is going to be our example of a film that had a good balance when it comes to effects versus practical effects. And I will again let John start us off with his opinion.
Well, it was very balanced in my opinion. I mean, there was a lot of CGI in it because, it's Star Wars, it's going to have it. But I think there was the scenery they were in a lot of parts was actual scenery. I believe it was shot on a beach, wasn't it, Cody, at the very end battle, correct?
Yeah, it was actually shot on a beach, not a soundstage.
Yeah.
Just about every location was like a real world location.
Yeah.
Like saving the obvious, obviously.
Yeah, and you don't really feel that you're overwhelmed like you were in the first Star Wars episode 1 to 3, which 3 wasn't that bad, but you know what I mean. But I don't really think there was much scenery shot in those movies compared to this one. This one worked well. They had a balance of effects, natural effects. And I'm sure it's not I don't know how it's gonna age, but them imposing whatever they call that effect where they take the original actor's face and put it on someone else's body. Like they did for Grand Moff Tarkin and Princess Leia. What do they call that effect, Cody?
Face tracking, something like that.
Huh?
Face tracking. Deep fake is the internet.
Yeah.
Internet term for it.
Yeah, I thought the deep fakes were pretty decent. Princess Leia looked a little. Go ahead.
I thought the deep fake was based on like fan fiction that people accepted, and there was an actual technical term for face graphing or whatever it is that you call it.
There is a technical term for it. Deep fake is not it. Deep fake is
like a term for it.
Yeah, it's like an internet jargon term for it. It's like an internet nickname for what it is.
Okay.
There's a technical term for it. I just can't think of it.
I'm just going to call it deep fake for now, but Grand Moff Tarkin looked pretty decent. Princess Leia looked a little sketchy at the end there. But everything was very well done. The practical effects. Like I said, my favorite scene in the movie is the final closing with Darth Vader breaking in. Still can't get over that scene. I appreciate a lot of the mixing and blending of it, and the effects they do use. They do such a good job that you can't really notice that they're effects in some cases. There are some things that are obvious, obviously space travel and adding all the facilities on that beach and stuff, and probably all the was it ATSTs or ATATs that were on the beach?
ATATs are the four-legged ones.
Four-legged ones. Mm-hmm. They did a pretty good job mixing them in and stuff. It worked well. I liked it. I liked the movie. For being a Disney Star Wars movie, it was a pretty decent movie.
I feel like overall of all the Disney Star Wars films, Rogue One was the most palatable. We'll put it that way. But the special effects were good. The practical effects were very well implemented, and the CGI, you can tell when a lot of love goes into CGI work. And that is the case for that movie. Like the Star Destroyers and the ship scenes and everything looks very meticulously detailed and very well done. The lighting is fantastic. I feel like that's really good. I will slightly disagree with John on the character models for Moff Tarkin and Leia. Um, I think they were good, but I think they were well, for Tarkin especially was overused. I feel like um, when it worked best in the film is that first scene that introduced him, and you just saw his reflection in like the glass looking out into space, and he was talking. That looked fantastic. It was utterly seamless. But when they had him turn around and he was like a main character in the film, like I could, at least for me, I could really, really, really see it. The CGI like masking on the person. And then with Princess Leia, again, when they just had her looking down at like the Death Star plans and she was saying nothing, again, practically flawless. Like it's really, really good. Where it trips up is when she talks, when she says hope, because the way she says hope,
Yeah.
like it's like the way the Pillsbury Doughboy would enunciate hope. Like you can just see it kind of, being gummy as opposed to tissuey.
Mhm.
But that's not to say the effects were bad. They were good. I just feel like there was a few stumbles. Again, I mean, again, the technology is new. This is the first time something like this had really been tried on this scale. And so fair play and fair credit. When it worked perfectly and was practically seamless. It's just, I don't know, maybe I'm just have a more critical eye for that kind of stuff.
No, it's all
It's
right.
had time to improve because I think they use that kind of deep fake technology in the mixture of Forrest Gump back in the day.
Lightly, although it was on black and white film to show him like interacting with JFK and stuff. You
Yeah,
go back and watch it
Yeah.
and see it.
Yeah, I will say the
They-
mouth movements of these characters outdid uh outdid every single attempt they did at overdubbing in that film. It was pretty laughable.
yeah, yeah,
But good for the time, I think.
yeah, and the technology has gotten better. Like they don't do a lot of like actor swapping or like deep faking now. Usually they do a lot of de-aging for actors, and that's gotten to look a bit better. They did a decent job with Samuel L. Jackson in the Captain Marvel movie, and there's a couple others that have like the de-aging thing that do okay, but um, you know, that's just something I noticed in the film. Everything else, all the other effects were very, very good. And yes, that hallway scene with Darth Vader was fantastic.
Yeah.
I don't know how much of that was CGI and how much that was actual practical effects, but whatever they did was amazing in that scene.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Dark corridor, red lightsaber,
It's like a slasher
smoke in the
film.
air.
It was glorious.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I did look up some of the behind the scenes footage of this, and it does look like, from what I saw, because I'm not extremely familiar. I'm a guy who lost interest in Star Wars I'd say about 14, 15 years ago, because I watched it so much whenever I was a teenager, and really just, I laughed when I first found out that George Lucas had sold the rights to Disney, because, it's like, and keep in mind, this is in 2013, whenever nostalgia and franchises were not the bread and butter of Hollywood the way they are now. But I knew even then that Disney was going to be milking a dead cow when it comes to just how much they were going to overdo Star Wars with sequels and spin-offs. And so I really never paid it that much attention. So in the brief research that I did, it looked like they actually had some fully built sets of the desert planet that they were on, and some of the like what rooms that they were in. One of the rebel base, the meeting rooms. I could be wrong about that, but I think I'm not. And so yeah, I appreciate that, because I remember seeing this one scene from the Avengers where it was literally just the cast in their well done costumes, but they were, I think, either outside or in the city. I forget, but everything else was green screen. And I found that so, I've used this expression a lot, but it's true. I found it so soulless. So I appreciate that they did put some soul into this. I did also like the fact that they used a virtual reality camera to capture some of the moments in space. It helped the director do a really good point and click style to his what do you call the videography, something like that. I also,
Cinematography.
yeah, the cinema. God, I'm sitting here as a movie buff, and I can't think. I have a hard time articulating sometimes. I apologize, but I assure our listeners, I do know that word. I just couldn't think of it. Um, yeah, and while overall the VR games can sometimes look cheap, I felt like this one did work quite well. And Cody and John both, going back to what y'all said about Tarkin's face and Leia's face, I disagree in that I feel like Tarkin's face was done better and Leia's face was not. Obviously you can tell that it's CGI, but I think about whenever in Terminator 3, whenever Arnold got his head kicked off by the TX, and that scene where he picks his head back up and puts it on his body again, that was cutting edge for the time. Now it is clearly computer graphics. So comparing that to this, what was it, 18 years later, 15 years, it was a really well done piece of CGI, but it did seem, even with Tarkin, it seemed like with Leia they didn't try enough, and it seemed like with Tarkin they were trying too hard. It seemed like they were trying to make it look too perfect, too aged, too sun damaged. And when you try that hard, it becomes obvious that you're trying hard, which again will lose an audience. So, they did pay attention to detail, but they paid a little too much attention. Whereas the rest of the CGI, even though again, yes, I could tell overall that's a CGI, I was also sometimes saying that's probably CGI because they did do quite well. Like you said, Cody, I think they did put their heart and soul into using CGI. So I will give it that credit for both trying to stay true to the beauty of practical effects while also trying to put the CGI in where it belonged and putting in their heart and soul.
Fair enough.
All right, so that's going to bring us into our last film, guys, the film that we think is our best example of overused CGI, oversaturated CGI. Albeit a controversial pick, it is our pick. Live with it. It's going to be Avatar 1, the 2010, right, Cody? Or was it
2009?
9.
09? Okay, gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
So the 09 film that made James Cameron even filthier rich than Titanic did. And while it had initial success because of it being, as y'all have said before, John and Cody, pretty colors, it, in hindsight, is being critiqued more and more as just plain not that good. And part of it being because it is so heavily saturated in CGI. And we'll go ahead and talk with John. John, talk.
I'll be honest with you, I'm not going to be as long as I normally am because I don't remember much of the movie. I've seen it once.
Okay.
That was good enough for me. And I was with Cody and we went and saw it in IMAX and it was a good experience. I enjoyed the movie. But I don't particularly remember anything being very memorable from the movie. It goes back to that quote I said earlier. There's a bunch of pretty colors with no real substance or story. I was looking through a couple Reddit rants about the movie itself, and someone compared it to being what was it, Dancing with Wolves, or what was it? What's that movie called?
Well, there was one called Dances with Wolves, yeah.
Dancing with Wolves, but in CGI. So, and I've heard Cody, which I won't steal from Cody's thought about what movie he thought it was based on. I'll let him say that in his quote, but I agree. I don't know, man. There's not much memorable about the story. It was kind of like a nature story, to me, protecting nature and with a bunch of sci-fi elements in it. I just don't, I have no interest. Like, we were going to do this and we knew we were going to talk about this, but I refuse to rewatch the movie if that has anything to say.
John, I've not seen it once and I couldn't bring myself to fully watch it for the episode. I watched clips of it I watched clips of it and actually ended up turning it off because I was so bored. And I've heard so many reviews that I didn't even need to see it, quite frankly.
I mean, it kind of has some things where it tries to pull at your heartstrings, but it's kind of in the movie like 2 hours and 30 minutes, Cody, or 2 hours and 45 minutes. How long was it?
It's like 2 hours and it may be 41 minutes. I'd have to look it up.
It-
It's a long film.
I don't want to sit through that again. I remember some of the actors in it. I was amazed that the main villain was also in My Name is Earl at the time, which I enjoyed him more in that show than I did in that one. But I don't know, because Sigourney Weaver was in it. I don't really remember anything being memorable from her. Was there any live action in the movie? There was at some point, wasn't there, Cody?
Yes, anything involving humans, like human actors, like the people that were playing like the human beings, that was all live action. Some of the sets were probably to some degree practical, and some of the outside forest scenes, they may have filmed like actual forest, especially for like the aerial shots of like when the jets were flying over the woods and everything. Those felt like real. If they were CGI, they did a really good job, but those felt like more like actual forests. So there was some live action, but there was a majority of it was green screen and CGI.
Well, in their defense, they did a good job of blending those scenes because I really didn't notice. So that's a point for them. But as far as the story, it was not there. So the CGI was kind of pointless. And the CGI, I don't know if it's really aged well because I haven't really sat down and watched it again, like I said, but I doubt it's aged as good as some of the other movies.
It hasn't. I was watching the clips today, and I remember whenever we did our YouTube video, check it out, listeners. Watching the preview for part 2, and yeah, the CGI has improved in 13 years.
So that's kind of my thing. I can just keep saying I really don't remember anything about the movie if you want me to for a little bit longer, but there is nothing truly memorable to me.
Yeah. Well, Cody, talk, sir. Ramble, sir.
Okay. Well, to answer John's thing, I won't take full credit for how I described the film. I actually got it from another reviewer on YouTube, but the plot basically, they summed it up as Fern Gully dances with wolves while saving Private Ryan. I feel that's pretty apt. I feel like that was the perfect description because John's right. The plot of the film is very paint by numbers. It's Pocahontas. It's Dances with Wolves. It's any film you've seen where modernity goes up against tradition, the march of progress against the eternal pillar that is nature. Nature good, military industrial complex bad. The plot is not really why you turn up for the film.
It's James Cameron
it is the
proving
effects.
one more time that he's an anti-establishment hippie.
Yes, exactly. And so you show up for the special effects, and I remember when we went to see it in the theaters with John, and yeah, at the time it looked good. It was pretty light, it's pretty colors. Everything was colorful, and I think what helped it is it came out right around the time of films like The Dark Knight and the Bourne films, and all these films that had like this weird, desaturated kind of blue hue, and like nothing was bright and poppy and colorful. Everything was just very kind of dully blue tinted or muted.
It was
so I think that.
Sorry.
No, yeah. It was the peak of that kind of filmmaking. So like for a big budget, colorful film to come out, probably did it a ton of favors. But to the effects, I went back to sit down and watch this film like back
I feel
at the
sorry for you.
Yeah, at the very beginning of December, I had some time to kill, and I figured I'll just watch it. I'll have it on. I got some chores to do. I got some laundry, and I'll put it on. And I'll tell you what, like, I put it on. I got 30 minutes, and I was like, yeah, I can put something better on while I fold laundry. Like, it didn't even really grab my attention as background noise.
I think,
and again, that's more of a scar against the plot than the effects, but still. What were you saying, John?
I think what may have helped pushed it along at the time was that, this was the really big push for IMAX. to be inculcated in regular theaters, because I think this was the maybe second or first or third movie that the AMC that we went to, which Robert is very familiar with the AMC,
Yes, I am.
had an IMAX theater for this. Did they have to do any? They may have had to done something special for the theater for it. But we thought it was really special because it was an IMAX, and now pretty much everything's available on IMAX.
Yeah, and so
they did nothing special. They just gave you glasses and made it IMAX 3D.
Pretty much. And so with that in mind, like, I did get to watch the special effects, and I watched it on my big Roku TV. And so I can't say that, they're not terrible, but they definitely have showed their age. They definitely have not aged super gracefully, especially some of the machine shots, like the robot armor suits that they have in the film, and then of course the characters themselves do a decent job of emoting, but there's still like, I don't know, something lost in translation between the actors that they're trying to depict in these avatar forms and the forms themselves. Like the way they talk and everything, it always feels like the character model is like a kind of like a half step behind the actual actor and what they're doing. And so, it's just a case of them really, really wanting to push the envelope of what was capable. And again, in doing that, I think they pushed it a little too far. And that's not to say that all the effects are terrible or it's all bad. And they were decent, but it just shows its age. The place where it shows age the least is with like maybe a couple of the animals, like the wild animals, not like the characters. And I think that goes back to what John was saying with the, when you're not trying to make something super realistic, because the animals are like alien. So, we have no frame of reference of how they're supposed to look, unlike a humanoid or a robot. We have a frame of reference for what those are supposed to look like in real life or could potentially look like. But when it comes to like alien fauna, we don't really have a bar, so our brains kind of have a higher tolerance for what it's willing to let go of. So those come away looking pretty decent, but the characters themselves and some of the machine shots and stuff like that kind of show up short.
Yeah. All right. Well, I, like John, don't have a whole lot to say about the movie. It was basic, trying to avoid too much of a review for the film, because I do think it's kind of trash. Sticking strictly with the theme of this podcast being about, or this episode being about these special effects in it, it was like watching a really well done 2000s video game. And with some realistic scenes thrown in, like they did in 2000s video games back then, where they would toss in an occasional actual actor and then a crap ton of CGI for all the cutaway scenes. And, again, like all that is wrapped around a paper thin story where, again, James Cameron is just saying the government's out to get you, And I can see why it, and the thing is, to all of our listeners,
Titanic's out to sink you.
Yeah, right. I know, I admit, and we as a group admit that CGI, you can't make a film like this without the CGI. You need to have it, but it was CGI galore, and it was CGI that didn't age well, and it takes us back to what we were originally saying, that when you rely too heavily on CGI, you do lose the timelessness factor. And Avatar, I think it's safe to say, is not timeless because it did rely so heavily on CGI. So, I think this film takes its rightful place as a film that did not know when enough was enough. Obviously you need the CGI for the blue characters, but you could have done a lot more. You could have used the actual forests a lot more. You could have built practical sets a lot more and not relied so heavily on computer graphics. So yeah, as we say on this podcast, so yeah.
I was thinking as like, how would James Cameron have made this movie if it was 1985 or 1990? What would he have done? Would he got a bunch of skinny people and painted them blue and let them swing around in trees? And,
very skinny people.
Maybe he could steal some light and magic practical effects to make the robots and You wouldn't have to DH Sigourney Weaver any.
Had he
Probably could have
painted
got
her
a
up
better.
because she did look young in that film.
Yeah. He probably could have got a better villain too.
Yeah.
There were a
Well,
lot of-
to his somewhat credit, I will say James Cameron apparently had the idea for the film of Avatar like not long after he finished Titanic, and he realized for what he wanted to do with the film, like CGI technology in the 90s was not there, and so he sat on the idea until he felt the time was right. So he wasn't. It wasn't just him just wanted to make the super CGI fest right now. He had an idea for how he wanted this film to go, and he was trying to wait as long as he possibly could to see it done. But CGI is a tricky beast. It's always improving. It's like not owning a phone until you're sure you own the latest and greatest smartphone.
Which is impossible.
You'll always lose that battle.
I still have an iPhone 6. I have an iPhone 6. And I have an iPhone 8 for when that 6 dies that John gave me.
It's out of date too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's kind of the same. CGI is kind of the same way. You can never own and continue to own forevermore the latest and greatest smartphone. It'll be replaced by next year with something even better. And CGI is kind of the same way. You can be on the bleeding edge, but that bleeding edge is going to eventually like scab up and make way for the new cut in CGI technology. So,
and scabs are ugly.
Yes, scabs do not age well. So,
yep. All right. Well, then, final thoughts, guys. Final question for the evening. What is CGI's place in modern cinema? John, you've been starting us off. I will let you go again, sir, if you feel prepared.
CGI needs to have a balanced place in a movie. I mean, it needs to be balanced, whatever you do with it. And they really shouldn't go overboard with it. Because if you try to go with realistic effects, you're not going to get what you want. As time progresses, that is. But it's still going to be there. It does simplify things. You don't have to go through as much effort or put as much money into a project. So it's always going to be there. You just need to balance the way you use it. And for those movies that are 100% CGI, really go for an artistic look if you're going to continue to do it, because otherwise your film is going to burn out like Avatar.
Yeah, I actually don't see Rogue One burning out the way Avatar did, because again, that was really good CGI. You can't deny that.
But I guess you can also say Avatar isn't really upset about that because they made quite a bit of money.
Yeah, like who cares?
Yeah.
Do you see all this money? Look at it. Look at my money.
James Cameron says, I will bow my head in shame as I sit upon my throne made of $20 bills.
He lights his cigars with a spare Franklin that he found under his shoe. Yeah.
Coincidentally, that he's all taken from a burned down rainforest.
Ooh. All right, so Cody, where again, the place that CGI has in modern cinema, go.
I feel like the place it has is the place that I feel like since its inception, CGI it should always have, even in its earlier years. Balance is certainly part of it, but I feel like if there is something that you're imagining for your film and you just cannot capture it with a practical effect or with the relatively guaranteed safety of your actors or any combination of those things, that's when CGI should come into effect. For example, like in Rogue One, like you could still do space battles practically, but the fluidity and the motion of the ships and how they moved and the weight of them and everything, you can capture that with much more finer detail and much more veracity in CGI, and so it makes sense, as opposed to like a robot or a battle droid on a planet. It'd be difficult, but you can still capture that with practical effects. So I feel like at any point that what you want to achieve in your film exceeds what is possible to do believably or safely with practical, then by all means use CGI. Like, if you want to have a Tyrannosaurus Rex like charging down a street, clocking in at like 25 miles per hour and like knocking cars over in like a single shot of this creature just moving, like, you can't get that with practical. You can't. You need robotics that just don't exist at this time. To say nothing of the danger of having an actual 7-ton, 45-foot long predator careening down a street. So,
Artificial or not,
you know, yeah, official or not, that's still a dangerous proposition. And so, you know, I feel like that's kind of the place of CGI, to capture the furthest reaches of our imagination.
Yeah. Well, my thoughts are, you know, obviously we need CGI. I'm not anti-CGI. But I would say to the filmmakers out there, who I'm sure will never hear this, is watch the arrogance. And I say that because I remember the attitude that we had in the 2000s. We were so sure of ourselves and our CGI. And you can see that in how often it was used in the big time blockbusters, especially, you know, once again, at episode 2, they really thought this is as good as it gets. We are geniuses. Let's just go all in with it. And now we see how crappy it looks. And it's like, we need to watch out even now. Yes, our CGI these days is amazing, but watch it get even more amazing. So if we rely too heavily on it, we need to learn from 20 years of mistakes that CGI does age. It has a place, a rightful place. But you need to not think this is as good as it's ever going to get. So my thoughts are, its place is a humble one.
That makes sense. I get that.
All right.
It makes sense.
Thank you, John. It's much appreciated. Well, John, you got a song for us tonight, sir?
Why are you going to put me on the spot like that?
Because you always have a song. I'm disappointed in you right now, John.
Tequila.
Tequila. All right. All right, guys. Well, as always, thank you guys for listening to the So Yeah podcast. John, Cody, always a pleasure, my friends. We now have YouTube exclusives, guys. So if you are new to our podcast and do not know about this, we do indeed have a YouTube channel that will soon be rebranded 3 Random Millennials, but as of right now is still searchable, findable, whatever, on YouTube as the So Yeah podcast, where we do occasional box office predictions / trailer reactions and who the heck knows what else as the channel grows. If you're already on our YouTube, hit like, hit subscribe, comment, all that fun stuff that makes the algorithm get excited. If you're on our Spotify, make sure to follow us. I will leave a random, a random poll for you guys to answer. And we actually have gotten really good results on the poll, which is much appreciated. Thank you all for voting. And I guess that's it for today, guys. Stay tuned
Or
for
our
our next
Patreon.
episode. Yeah, or our Patreon. No one's going to enter the Patreon for a long, long time. But anyway, that's all for now, folks. Check out our YouTube and listen in next month for our next episode. Oh, and be sure to look at our Facebook so I can actually begin to do things with our Facebook. So, yeah.
Tequila.